new Minister who will make sure it's a success.
Mr Chair.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. I rise to take a call on the review of the Treasury part of this debate. I want to focus in particular on page 11, which is the alternatives to GDP discussion James Shaw had in the committee and is in the report of the Prime Minister. But I want to start with a bit of a story. Because at the time that Tāne Mahuta, the great Kauri tree in the Waipawa forest, was just a sapling growing up north, on the other side of the planet, a great city was being sacked and a new noun was being added to our lexicon. In 455 AD, Genseric, the king of the Vandals, along with his army, stood outside the gates of the city of Rome. At the time, the emperor and half the population fled the city in terror, and for 14 days, the Vandals sacked the city. They destroyed and damaged buildings, including the Great Temple. They carted off loads of treasure, and forever their name was immortalised with the act of vandalism. They're also famous for across the Greek world, because what they'd do is to get the little bit of lead inside the Greek temples, they'd dismantle the great marble blocks just to get that little bit of lead. And when we do not measure the real things, when we do not look at the big picture, when we only measure those short-term little inputs or costs, we miss out. And this is why I want to talk about the risk of vandals today, because that tribe became synonymous with vandals. But 1,500 years on, the Vandals aren't at our gates anymore. In fact, they're in charge of our country. The Vandals, they don't wear war paint or carry swords anymore. They wear suits and they carry resource consents. These environmental vandals, who don't have the idea on the big picture, the important things that we should be measuring, they're wrecking our waterways, they're plundering our forests. They're throwing our clean green brand on a bonfire of ideology. You can see it in the report when the Prime Minister says we're thinking about it, have been thinking about measuring broader things than just gross domestic product since 2011, but we're not going to do it. Because take what it means in the real world. When you look at our rivers and lakes, our kids are getting sick because they're just so dirty. Everyone knows what the problem is. The problem is we've got an equivalent of 90 million people releasing their effluent into the environment, and we're only treating 10%. We're only counting the economic benefits. We're not counting the economic costs. What we see is instead of making them swimmable, we're not focused on measuring and counting and fixing or making them swimmable. What we see is, in fact, a changing of the definition to just swimmable. Mr Chair, that's just like someone scratching your car and calling it art as an excuse. Now, you can see it in the same with our conservation estate. Now, Rome wasn't sacked in a single day, and we're seeing the same thing with our conservation estate, death by 1,000 cuts. When we don't measure the important things in life, we see what the Vandals did, taking it out. Now, Doc's the guardian of our national estate. $20 billion in economic benefit to New Zealand has been estimated because of our clean green brand. But instead of protection or counting the important things, what we get is slogans: a war on weeds, a battle on birds, targets which are so ridiculously far in the future that those who will actually be responsible when their cause due will be ancient history. You can also see it in the vandalism of our climate when we don't measure the important things and only measure, because then you do things like promoting oil drilling, subsidising it, promoting coal mining, opening up the Maui's Dolphin Sanctuary, the shores of Lake Tiano to oil drilling. That's what happens. Now, Mr Speaker, this is worse than fiddling while Rome burns in the midst of a climate crisis. In fact, it's just like pouring petrol on the fire. Now, the Prime Minister, he's had 9 years to address these, to count the impacts of our toxic rivers, the species going extinct, the conservation estate being degraded. But instead what we saw was a Prime Minister who stood before us and said, I came, I saw, and I squandered. How will historians look back at this generation and the actions and inactions contained in this report? We had all the advice, all the science, all the experts telling us what we could do, but instead of acting to protect our environment, they simply made it worse. Now, I talk about Rome because we don't have those gigantic great temples and we don't have cartloads of gold and treasure, but we've got something more important: our natural environment, and that is more valuable than any gold. Our forests and our rivers, they are our temples. The bird song is our choir. As New Zealanders, these are the important things, and if we don't measure it, we're not protecting it. We can build, protect, and restore. The environment and the economy don't have to be in conflict or trade them off just to get a quick buck like those vandals did, pulling out the iron between the marble blocks. Now, in this debate, I wanted to talk about we can do things better. We can measure the important
Chair.
things in
I
life.
call up Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to